Hello, and welcome back. This week, for episode 8, I'm joined by George Monck, founder of Clean Up UK, who is going to be talking with us about the fight to keep Britain's streets clean from litter by organising local communities. We discuss how poverty and deprivation affects an individual's feeling of pride in their surroundings, the variety of reasons why people litter, how things have changed over the decades, how litter picking can bring about healing post-COVID, and much more. If you like this episode and would like to follow George's work, please follow the links in the description. If you'd like to support us, you can make a donation at restoreourplanet.org or follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Enjoy the conversation. Hello, welcome back to Restore Our Planet podcast with me, your host, Jack Cole. I'm here with George Monck, who is the founder and executive director of Clean Up UK. George, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, great. Very happy to be with you, Jack, and to talk about important things.
Fantastic. Sounds good. So just to kick things off, would you mind telling our audience a little bit about your background and how things got started with you?
Yeah, well, my background is many and varied. At university, I studied Latin, Greek, and ancient history and a bit of philosophy. So that clearly equipped me perfectly to go into the environmental sector. And through my time, I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry as a management consultant, latterly as the chief executive of a barrister's chambers. And it was at that point I thought, I've got to do something different and something that fulfills me.
Excellent, brilliant. And I'm sure that leads us on nicely to how did Clean Up UK get started?
Well, funny enough, you know, I blame my parents. I think most parents are responsible for most things, aren't they? And when I was 7, we used to go on holidays to North Devon, to Woolacombe. And I've always remembered that they organised a beach litter pick. So this was I'm giving my age away now, 1964. And it was quite unusual to do something like that then. But more than that, we lived in a village in Hampshire. My dad would always take me round the lanes, picking up the litter, trimming the nettles and all this sort of stuff. So I think it was instilled in me from an early age.
Brilliant. And then tell me, how did that then develop into you founding your organisation? Yeah,
well, I've always picked up litter. I hate the sight of it. It sort of blights the lovely countryside where I've generally been lucky enough to live. And so when I was at the barrister's chambers, I was just thinking, I've really got to, go and do something that makes me feel fulfilled. What am I passionate about? Litter. So what I did was I sent a questionnaire to all about 430 odd local authorities in the UK then, and saying what's needed to improve the litter situation. And I got a really good response rate. And the overwhelming answer was, we need to get more people involved. We need to get the citizens involved.
Okay, and then how does Clean Up UK come in? What exactly, how do they orchestrate that coming together of communities?
Yeah, well, we started off perhaps aiming at everyone with a website called Litter Action, which we started in partnership with the Campaign to Protect Rural England, CPRE, which was headed at the time by Bill Bryson, very, very passionate litter activist and campaigner, and who's done, I think, a huge amount for the cause. But we, over the first 2 or 3 years, realized, we're a small organization, so we need to target what we do and focus it very carefully. And we thought, well, where's litter worst? Well, it's worst in those areas of deprivation and disadvantage. So we then took the decision to narrow our focus to working on the ground in disadvantaged areas, initially in London and Birmingham.
Where do you think there is a connection between litter, dropping and sort of deprived areas?
It's one of these things that is very complex, I think, Jack. And I think it's to do with the fact that often the more affluent areas are better looked after by the local authority. Perhaps people are better at complaining in those areas. In the more disadvantaged areas, frankly, a lot of people have other things to occupy their minds, and their priorities are different. Often survival, but often in in the more disadvantaged areas, the population is denser, it's more mixed, the communities aren't quite so strong, and often even things like the street furniture, as we might call it, is a bit more in less good repair, perhaps fewer bins historically in some places. So it's a combination of all sorts of things.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that. Are there any other sort of surprising trends that you came across?
Well, I suppose when you think of it, that isn't a surprising trend, but it's certainly where we have, put most of our effort, because that's where the effort's needed. I think one of the surprising things I've come across in the whole sort of litter arena, as I've got experienced in it over the last 14 years, during the life of Clean Up UK, is why people drop litter. And again, research done by Keep Britain Tidy shows there are all sorts of reasons why people drop litter, ranging from, oh, I didn't think it was litter, like a little bit of paper or an apple core, to, well, there wasn't a bin there, what was I supposed to do? To people who are actually very angry about the fact that the council haven't provided a bin or cleaned this place up. To perhaps the extreme of people who really don't care. And I think actually they are the most difficult litterers to address and challenge.
Absolutely. So how do you begin to address those challenges? Is it education, or is it some other?
Yeah, good question, Jack. I mean, the ways to address the whole problem of littering, I think, are many and varied. And if anyone says this is the answer, I would be very skeptical of them. So it's a mix of infrastructure, so having the right litter bins in the right places, and that they're emptied often enough. How many overflowing litter bins have we seen? Quite
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm not blaming the councils for this, because often with their hugely reduced budgets, they're stretched too. It is, education is important, but again, it's more complicated, I think, than some people feel. Because in my experience, primary school children love going out litter picking. They're really, they educate their parents about recycling and litter picking. But then when, they turn into teenagers, there are other priorities, and suddenly it's not very cool to put your litter in a bin. And one of my hopes is that one day we can make it really cool to put your litter in a bin. So there are all sorts of, that's what fascinates me about the whole litter issue. It's full of many and varied issues.
Fantastic. And tell me a little bit. So you said that you started with your father in 1964, you said, in North Devon. How was the general kind of, that's a strange way of putting it, but how was the litter scene, as it were, changed? Is there more litter now? Is it different type of litter? How are things?
Well, it's interesting to sort of plot the timeline of it, because Keep Britain Tidy was formed as a campaign by the Women's Institute, amongst others, in the early 1950s. And I guess that up to then, littering had gradually been increasing, but in the 1950s, someone said, hey, look, this is getting too much. So even by the early 1960s, 1964, we're talking about, perhaps, the litter situation wasn't anything, well, I know it wasn't anything like it is today. But what has undoubtedly made it exponentially worse is the advent of fast food and eating on the go. And you walk down any street or any country lane even, find there are fly tipped, all sorts of things there. But if you look at the littered rather than fly tipped items, they're all to do with eating and drinking on the go. And so I think that has been the big change.
Cigarette butts as well, aren't there?
Yep, you're right.
Come on, one. So tell me, back again to Clean Up UK, how did the very first few groups start? Did you start with your your local community, or how were the first few groups formed, and how did it go at the time?
Yeah, well, if I talk about the groups that we helped to start in the disadvantaged areas, we actually started working in the 5 what were then known as the Olympic London boroughs, leading up to the 2012 Olympics. So they were Newham, Tower Hamlets, Hackney, Greenwich and Waltham Forest. So we had we employed a project coordinator on the ground to go around these boroughs looking for people to start up litter picking groups. And even then, she was knocking at an open door. People wanted to do something for their community. And, gradually we built up the momentum. And to the extent that in London and Birmingham now, over those, so that was 2011, we started that project. Over those 10 years, we've helped more than 350 litter picking groups start up in the disadvantaged areas of London and Birmingham.
Brilliant. And this sort of feels like maybe a bit of an obvious question, but have you noticed it has brought communities together?
Do you know, that's a very good point, Jack, because actually what we say is that we're not just an environmental organization, we're a community organization too. And the feedback we've had from the groups that we've helped to get together has been as much about the social and community aspects of it, as well as the environmental aspects. And also things like mental health. People say, gosh, we really feel good going out there with people probably we didn't know before. So we've made some friends. We've been doing something that's got immediate impact. Within an hour of going to a place that's badly littered, we've made it look spick and span. And, also our mental health has improved, our fitness has improved, our friend, our group of friends has broadened, as well as a good environmental impact. So it's a, I don't know, win-win-win-win-win situation, I think they might call it, Jack.
Brilliant. And what's the general trend of Clean Up UK? I mean, are you just finding there's more and more and more groups now and things are expanding and attitudes are changing, or?
Yeah, I mean, actually, from our own point of view in Clean Up UK, our challenge has been how to grow further around the disadvantaged areas of the UK without mounting up huge costs in doing so. In fact, one of our former trustees made, I thought, the very graphic point. Clean Up UK needs to find a way of expanding without creating a beast that needs feeding. So what we're trying to do at the moment, in fact, we've just started a new way of working, which is to expand out from London and Birmingham to 7 other towns and cities around England to start with that have high levels of disadvantage and littering, and try and work through local volunteers and local organizations so that we're, if you like, supporting them and helping them to work in their own areas.
Okay, brilliant. I'm really fascinated. We did sort of touch on it a few moments ago. I'm really fascinated in this idea of why people litter. Could you expand a little bit on? Do you feel like it's almost like a kind of I don't want to say this sounds maybe a bit heavy, but sort of spiritual, deeper kind of nihilistic kind of feeling has taken over people. They don't really seem to care, and they don't feel sort of connected to the environment around them. I was even reading recently quite a good point of ugly architecture attracts crime because people don't feel that sense of beauty and respect in their environment. I don't know if I've just answered my own question there, but do you think litter kind of ties into that in some sense of people's
I think very much so. Yeah, very much so. And what people now refer to as the built environment. If your surroundings are inspiring, then you're probably more likely to take care of them. But I think the advent of the pandemic and the various lockdowns, Jack, has shed a bit more light on this. We've all, I'm quite sure, noticed, to start with, the number of face masks chucked on the ground.
Yeah.
The number of, gloves, empty bottles of sanitizer, all these sort of things chucked around the place, which again, I think it's about, you talk about pride, perhaps awareness of people's area, that actually they're thinking, I'm just dropping one small thing, but if everyone does it, it turns into one big pile of stuff. And also the fact within the pandemic and lockdowns is that people are dropping stuff that could be contaminated with a virus, which is not a very smart thing to do. And further than that, there's been some fairly recent, I think it was last year, research in Holland, showing that the specific dropping of what you might call COVID litter has had a particularly bad effect on wild animals. And they've got caught up in masks and swallowed rubber gloves and
Right.
well. So I think yes, there are still many and varied reasons why people drop litter, but it's particularly disappointing to us that this has not only continued but exacerbated in the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah, I was about to come on to the pandemic. So what role do you think that Clean Up UK and these litter picking groups can have in the COVID recovery in terms of people's mental health, etc.?
Yeah, well, a good point. And I mean, you talk about mental health. Litter picking just allows you to get out into the open air and do something very simple, very easy, and very positive and very beneficial to you. So the mere fact of doing it is an antidote to having been locked away for so long. So there's that obvious thing. I think it's litter picking by people all around the country is even more needed now because of the extra rubbish dropped in the lockdowns. And we're seeing even now some litter picking groups have been a bit reluctant to get back out there because they're worried about the social distancing and particularly if they're older and at risk.
Of course.
So there is this complicating background to it. It's not life now, we all know, isn't quite as simple and straightforward as it was before.
Absolutely. Sounds like, yeah, your organization have a really big role to play actually in a variety of areas there in recovery. It's like a bit of a separate issue actually, but I wanted to ask you about biodegradables and what you think in terms of, let's say, for example, that everything that is thrown away was biodegradable. Do you think, what do you think effect that would have in terms of, in general, really, what effect do you think that would have? That's my question.
Cracking question, Jack, because again, there's more to this than meets the eye, because I think, of course, I'm in favor of all packaging, first of all, being minimized, secondly, being biodegradable. But one still has to remember that if something biodegradable is dropped as litter, it doesn't biodegrade instantly. It sometimes takes, well, it might be 2 or 3 years to biodegrade properly. So it's still, on the whole, you think even a bit of fruit peel or an apple core, it doesn't disappear immediately, let alone some biodegradable packaging or a bag or something. So it's still, in terms of litter, it takes some time to stop being litter. So although biodegradable packaging, I think, it's got to be the way we go. We've got to minimize it and we've got to stop dropping it too.
Absolutely. Okay. And so, George, is there anything else you'd like to share with us that, maybe some insights you've had over the years that you found interesting, or something that excites you about the future?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that some of the feedback we've had from people who've been out litter picking has been quite heartwarming, actually. One of the quotes I always remember from a lady, I think in Newham in London, was she said, she went out on her litter pick and she said, "I now know there are good people in my area." I mean, what an uplifting discovery. But I think my overriding message to anyone who perhaps doesn't go out litter picking and thinks it might be something they'd like to do is that you get such wonderful benefits from doing so. It makes you feel better. It makes other people feel better. It makes your neighborhood a nicer place to live in. And I think, funnily enough, we're researching the consequences at the moment on global warming of littering, because it's not quite clear if the act of littering actually, well, how it sort of harms the global warming issue. But we are talking to some old friends of ours in one of the universities about doing a project on this. So there may be even broader, and we think there probably are broader and longer term issues and benefits that we can bring to the planet and not just to our communities.
Brilliant. So are you, on that, would you say you're optimistic about the future? Things are heading in the right direction, or are we heading for a catastrophe? Which way are we headed?
Jack, for any of us in the litter arena, if we aren't optimistic about the future, we wouldn't be here. The main thing is, and again, going back to research from Keep Britain Tidy, that shows that if a place has no litter, then I wouldn't say it's not going to get littered again, but research shows people are less likely to re-litter it. So I think there's that too. And I'm very optimistic about the future, because I think if we can get more and more people in the UK citizenry, if you like, involved in keeping litter, off the streets and the lanes and the parks, apart from anything else, it shows other people that their neighbours care, and it might, it does, I think, make people think twice about dropping their own litter if they see other people picking it up.
Absolutely, I agree. So, George, where can people follow you and see what you're up to and what's going on?
Well, the main place is to go to cleanupuk.org.uk, and that will have links to our social media. And please come and join us and get out there, because all I can say is that you must do it safely and get a litter picking stick and wear gloves, but you'll love it and you'll make great friends and you'll do your neighborhood a great service.
Absolutely. And just for a few stats there. So I think I saw, if I'm right, you've got something like 250,000 bags of litter have been picked up in about a decade or something like that. And then you've got 432 groups and about 1,500 members. So pretty substantial number of people getting involved.
Yeah, and there are loads more throughout the UK who we don't have a connection with, who are involved. So it's certainly, if you like, it is one of the things of the moment, litter picking. I think people realise the moment has come to do something about it.
Absolutely. Okay, George, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on your podcast, Jack.